by popular request, we're back. This is what the loyal followers of YouTube appear to want. Tonight we haven't had the glasses of wine, unfortunately, or fortunately actually for you guys.
Gave me a very strong cup of tea.
Yeah, so on the basis of a strong cup of tea each, we're kind of reviewing the events over the last, shall we say, 100 years, including where we started, Nick and I, and our analysis of the unfolding of social and political economic problems that we face now.
Yeah. Before we get into it, I'd say we've both been sort of like very valid doom merchants. We've made some really good predictions and we've been right. We didn't want to be right, but it's just the way it's panned out. And one of the things which I find rather distressing about my fellow citizens is their inability to take a Cassandra voice and actually say, hey, we really ought to do something about that. We really need to see what is going on around us. And it's quite explainable in that people would prefer the things which are real to them to carry on. It's an innate conservatism and will for us to actually not have change and things like this, and unfortunately we're having it thrust upon us. So
the incredible power of popular culture and the media and its social construction of reality that we are contending with, and I think that's actually one of the issues that is not reflected on very much. Yeah. And I guess that's one of the big problems.
It's one of the things which I tend to do a lot is I look forward and I say, well, what can I interpret out of what I'm seeing today, what's going to happen tomorrow based upon what's happened in the past. And so some people say, well, why is he doing that? It's simple. I work in a sort of commercial environment and I like to be able to actually say, hey, what's the world going to be doing tomorrow? What have we got to do to prepare? And in my own personal life, I look at it and say, bloody hell, what do I have to do? What do I have to do for me and the people around me to actually make sure that, you know, that sort of conservative streak in myself has got things lined up? And part of what Bryan and I do when we predict things is actually say, well, what does it mean to us? What are we going to do about it? And who's this affecting? And so if people don't like us, you know, saying these things, well, I'm sorry, but we do.
Well, you see, in a way, Nick working in business and me in politics, it's really about the same stuff. Business and politics, in a way, you know, it's this battle for ascendancy and the sharing, how the cake's going to be shared. And I laboured under the illusion that it was going to be something fair and just in the political game when I first got into it, or that I could straighten out some of the crooked parts of it. And alas, I've discovered that actually that's a huge task. It's actually probably beyond me.
Which is probably a good point to make a statement and say business is a battlefield as well. And what you're experiencing right across the world today is a very slanted battlefield, and you're watching some very dirty tactics going down. And in particular, I'm talking about the reality, which is the major corporations and what that wonderful expression, the banksters, the people who are taking your money, privatising it, using it to pay off their debt, and then telling you you owe it to them. And I mean, this is a really good thing if you are a bankster. It's a bloody terrible thing if you're you and me. So on that note, we're talking about things which have happened in history before, and Bryan was talking about the events leading up to the First War and you know, what I described as the golden age of liberal capitalism and imperialism, and you know, laissez-faire gone wild. And the end result was the First War, which, you know, carried on until 1945 with a sort of brief intermission with a depression in it. But you know, we came out of that with a sort of an idea of way we could run our communities and our economies in a fairly measured way. And a generation and a half later we forgot the message and we threw the whole thing out and we said, we'll go back to this wonderful bloody dog-eat-dog crap again. And what you're seeing today, that's the end result.
Nick, I can't help thinking that there's a kind of two things going on in a culture. You're kind of setting the stage for what that culture is going to be. And in Western culture, and it's kind of like something that's global as well, but there has to be a kind of philosophical and moral, ethical and religious underpinning. And it doesn't matter where you turn. If you go and you look at the East, they have it. In the West, you know, there was the religious traditions of the Judeo-Christian. In the East, various forms of explanation, religious explanation, if you like, rationalizing or some attempt to define what the problem is, and then provide some kind of solution in terms of what the ultimate concerns, if you like. There's an interesting phrase. Paul Tillich invented it, that religion was all about your ultimate concern. But there's this kind of marriage of that ethical thing with the economic and political. And what happens is that you sort of can be fooled into thinking that something is quite unique and distinct is taking place. But really, I think it's just an ongoing sort of tug-of-war in culture between the irrational and the rational, and between how you buttress a system with some kind of ethical and moral backdrop, because, you know, it's to kind of be something more gutsy to the institutions that you find yourself in. I mean, if it's like democracy and it's just about a formula for democracy, it's not going to go very far, because you need an ethical and moral underpinning as well. And for obvious reasons. We don't want to go into explaining all this, because we make these videos for thinking people. Yeah. So you've got to close in the dots, guys.
I think there's a bit of a line of thought coming through here from Bryan, and he was referring to post-Enlightenment European thinking, which seems to be the dominant around the world now. And we're talking about going back to Voltaire and his triumph of the rational man, where the man suddenly became independent of the environment around him, of everything which had happened before. He was no longer part of the community necessarily that followed him as opposed to was him. And so what we've done, we've got this excessive idea of the individual and where they fit in, and how that individual can fit outside the moral boundaries. And I can give you an extremely good example of a man who thinks he is a rational economic being, and, you know, follows that rational economic model of, you know, the new free market model. And his name's David Cameron. He's a Prime Minister. And this is the man who believes that, you know, he represents a moral position, yet he is above that moral position. He's gone beyond it. He doesn't have to adhere to what he says. When he was at university, he used to get himself into any amount of trouble with his club. And the whole concept was you had to be very rich to belong to it. It's called the Bullingdon Club. And they would smash up restaurants. They would just do generally, you know, nasty stuff, but then the cash would swap hands and people would take the reparation and shut up, and the cops would go away. This is the man who's calling for the head of rioters who've just taken other stuff, and he's calling them scum. He's set himself apart from them. He's actually what I describe as a great example of rational man gone wrong and stood away from his fellow man. So I don't know how you see that, Bryan, but...
Well, no, I do, and actually analysing the British situation of those riots. And of course in the US something similar happened, what, 20-odd years, 25 years ago. But I think actually when you get this tension between absolute wealth and poverty, these are the kind of issues that get thrown up. And I mean, the sense of outrage, of moral outrage and annoyance, muddled up with mob behaviour, and to just suggest that law and the enforcement of law is a solution to this is quite wrong, because no law actually, as it's practiced, is actually quite often just an instrument of oppression.
Yeah, it's funny because when you talk to law has two sides to it, and you know, I very rarely hear this, but the whole thing is that if the society who the law applies to doesn't agree with the law, it is going to be an oppressive measure. At the same time, if you're applying the law, you've actually got to adhere to the law, and that's probably the most major problem we're facing at the moment in terms of Western societies and their economic model, because we have people at the top who feel that it's quite appropriate to take and be corrupt and, you know, appropriate the wealth from everyone else for themselves. And then when those people object, throw the law at them.
Yeah.
And you've got to say, well, hang on, what moral ground have they got to do that? The people who are taking things back from the bottom end, they don't believe the law applies to them anymore because it doesn't do anything for them. So why would they adhere to it? So we've got a very broken model, and I think we've seen it all before. And I'll go back to my good old mate St. Francis, who saw the corruption of the church in the 1200s, and his comment was that he came to rebuild a church, and he was talking about a broken building. At least that's what people thought. He was talking about a broken structure, a broken morality, and he was there to actually do something about that. And I think it's a very powerful message, because it's within ourselves to actually rebuild our structures and actually give them some validity again. But the only way we can do it is by removing these people and actually making them adhere to the law, making them adhere to the morality. And therein lies our biggest problem.
Well, it is a big problem, because in the times of economic crisis, the state shifts into a more coercive gear. And basically what we're seeing in the UK with those rights, and also, you know, the Arab Spring, we're seeing the reaction of the state and economic crisis. And of course what it is, you know, a whole generation, actually probably two now, of people who are totally cut out of the economic benefits. And so, I mean, it is just so wrong to suggest that if we have 16,000 police combined in the UK, that they'll keep the unemployed in line, because it just doesn't work like that. And I think the sad part about it is, again, you're seeing all with the right-wing position, is they keep introducing notions of we've got to fix this by fixing the family, by making parents responsible, by introducing all these sort of moral panic issues. Again, another old trick of the right-wing political institution or establishment is to talk about a moral panic in times of economic crisis. It's really actually, you know, we've had this outrageous situation where as Nick has said, the profits have been privatised and the losses are being socialised. So it's, you know, if you're on the left, you're a bogeyman, but it's okay to pay for all the losses of the right. No problem at all. And yet, if you were to call for a socialising of the profits, that would be totally unacceptable. You know, that is actually a real contradiction in terms of the whole notion of justice and fairness and equity, and how any politician can get away with it is beyond me, but they do.
They do. And
yeah.
I'm sort of disturbed about it from a commercial viewpoint, because I like my customers to have money, because then my customers can buy from me. And of course, if all the money's gone right to the top of the tree and they can only consume so much, well, they're not going to buy from me. Well, they might, but I won't be selling enough. And that means that on a downward sort of sense, as we shrink what's available at the bottom of the pie, we've got a lot of people going to go hungry, and they're not going to be able to actually support the businesses which we actually run. That might sound quite a severe prognosis, but that is in effect what we're doing. We're exporting in this country, and it's happening right across the Western world. We're exporting the manufacturing jobs and the service jobs offshore to low-wage economies, which is great for those people, and the sort of theory is, well, that'll pull them up. Well, what it doesn't consider is the devastation which it leaves behind at the same time. I'm not against those people being pulled up. I think it's a great thing, but I don't want it done at our expense by pulling us down. And that seems to be what capital intends to do and is doing en masse. And I think it's actually, how should we say, it's socially irresponsible, it's irresponsible economics from a market viewpoint, and it's actually morally bankrupt. And I can't see it in any other sense.
Well, actually, there's a kind of little homily that kind of describes it, because of the disingenuousness of the political propositions that are given to us. It just sort of goes like this: well, look, really, the rich will do anything for the poor except get off their backs. And I mean, basically, this is what we've come down to. So why would you expect, you know, these people over in the UK and London and all those other places, and the people of Europe and of the Middle East, younger people, those between school leaving age, we'll say, and 35, who have actually been cut out of a system and have been told, you know, oh, I don't know how on earth you survive if you don't have any income, but, you know, it's acceptable that they'll have huge groups of people. Hey, you know, if you're going to have people who are idle and you're going to be, you know, the ruling class, and you're going to expect them to actually to misbehave. So there's some basic hypocrisies that we have to actually keep talking about. Yeah. Because we're actually really just striving for a fair and just society. We're a long way from that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no problem with people having a large amount through their efforts, but when it becomes a gangster grab on everyone else, that is it's an imposition that we can't afford as a society. And I'd like to expand that going forward into the other thing Bryan and I have been predicting. We're peak oilers, we're peak resources, and this seems to be a bit of a sore point with most of the population, because they say, bloody Cassandras again, they're telling us it's not going to be right. Well, we're not telling you that because we don't want it to be right. We're telling you that because that's how it's going to bloody be. Yeah. You know, and what we're looking is on the downside of this resource and energy decline. How do we actually keep our structures working? How do we actually distribute fairly? How do we stop people going to the wall? How do we actually make sure that we are looking after the whole of our polity? That, you know, we're not just sort of saying these people in the castle over there with a bloody great big grain field and a couple of swamps full of crocodiles and the way to stop you getting out in there and taking some, you know, while you're starving. You know, how do we prevent that kind of thing? Because that's the path we're on at the moment, and it's not very pretty.
Well, it did drive the First World War, and it certainly drove the Second World War. The problem was that there was not enough resources for the way that the economy was working. Yeah. And I think basically what we're back down to is that actually, you know, we're entering into another age of a shortage of resources, of the equitable distributing of those resources, as Nick is saying. And actually, as I think about it, that is actually a critical issue, is how we distribute what we have left.
And it's really interesting. We talk about oil and energy depletion. Something really interesting happened in the Arab Spring this year. They couldn't afford bread. Now, that phenomenon has always been quite a good one. I mean, if you go back to 1917, Lenin actually basically promised bread. That was how he got the peasants and the proletariat on side. Everyone, it happened during the French Revolution, they were promised a bread. If that bread can't be delivered, someone else will promise it, and then all hell breaks loose. Yeah. And there's just too many precedents for it. And what we have at the moment is a scenario where, if you look at the grain prices worldwide, they have increased nearly doubled in the last 12 months. They're becoming very affordable. We've got major famines in parts of Africa which are natural famines, but it's not able to be alleviated by presenting bread there because the money's not sufficient to spread it. At the same time, we've got massive shortfalls in the grain harvest caused by global warming, and for example, last summer most of Russia burnt. They refused to export their grain from their major agricultural areas. The American grain harvest was, on the contrary, was quite enormous, but a very large amount of it went into producing petrol, alternative fuel. So we'd rather drive these Humvees around than feed people. And I don't think it's going to be very different going forward. We're going to see that diminution. I think it just spells trouble. And we're seeing that trouble now, and we'll see more of it.
Yep. Afraid so, guys. International Energy Agency's revised its position on peak oil, and actually a while back it was talking about it extending out. You know, we were okay, 2015, 2020, 2000, whatever. Now it's actually revised it back, and it's actually saying, oh, well, looks like the world peaked in 2005 or 6, 2006 actually. So we're actually on the downward slope of peak everything. It's not just oil. But the sad part about it is people get a fixation that oil is just about running your car. Unfortunately, it's not. We're a monolithic fuel-based culture. And I'll tell you, I'm just looking around this room we're doing this recording in, and there's a lot of oil-based products, and you would hardly recognise it if it was all removed.
There's a couple of pieces of wood amongst them, but we'll get them fixed out of plastic. So
We're going to call it quits here, because although generously YouTube has given us extra time because we're now engaged at a different level with YouTube, we're going to run out of time. So we'll stop here. We'll pick this up later.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'll put in an ad as well. Brian's going to come and do a year in Nick's garden at some stage. So we'll be talking politics as we wander around the vegetables.
That's right.
Which is always good for a laugh.
We've both been working on our gardens, Nick more assiduously than me, because he's actually a serious-minded gardener, whereas...
Well, I also have the chickens demand I come up and throw them off of places, so... You know.
So the next time you see us, hopefully, we'll be showing you some of our more practical solutions to the dreadful problems we face.
Good one. See ya.